Hello world, and we are back. My name is Kyle Fischl. This is going to be episode 150 of my poker vlog. Before I get into the hands, one quick announcement. I'll be hosting a private 1-2 online meetup game this Sunday at 6 p.m. on Club GG. If you have any interest in getting into a really fun, splashy game, you can message me on Instagram or Telegram. I'll happily send you the details on that. And with that out of the way, let's roll the tape. First hand of note. We jump right into the 2-5 game on this day, and we are greeted with pocket aces. Under the gun, I raise to $15. A middle position player calls before the cutoff raises to $75. It's super early, and usually I wouldn't want to get out of line here, but with aces, we are definitely have no choice but to 4-bet. Be disastrous to go three ways with aces, equity goes down, and we'd like to get as much money into the middle when we have the nuts as possible. So the 4-bet sizing I choose is 275. Any size is going to look strong, but I definitely want to go a little bit bigger, get us shallower on the stack to pot ratio. Try to get it easier to get us all in on safer runouts. Otherwise, it's fine to just get folds and take the 90 bucks down and, no risk needed. But after the middle position player folds, the cutoff goes in the tank for a very long time. The longer he thinks, the more I'm putting him on like the 10s and jacks range. I think queens and kings are a little easier to either call or get it in. But he does eventually decide to put in the call. So we're going heads up to a flop of 6-3-6 rainbow. It is as dry as it gets. There is no risk on this board at all. Even better if my opponent was going very light with like 7s, 8s, 9s. Those hands are going to be in a tough spot when I bet super small in this flop. 180 is the bet in relation to the size of the pot. It's closer to 1/3. I could even go smaller, but definitely want to set up for a turn jam basically on any card if called. But it turns out it's not going to come to that, as after a bit of thinking, my opponent goes all in himself.
Over here, old friend. In case you haven't noticed, you've fallen right into my trap.
Well, that's quite a happy development. I snap call, obviously just show the aces, assume I'm good. I would offer to run it twice, but this opponent I've played with, he is a one-time, always, and only type of person, so we're just going to run this one out. King of hearts, really not the greatest. My opponent could have pocket kings here. If he thinks that I have a very narrow 4-betting range, he might just call with kings. So not super happy to see that turn card, but the river 8, my opponent does not show his cards. He pretty quickly puts them into the muck, and the count is going to be $735 is the all-in on the flop. So we start out this session with a full double up.
That actually looks like my exact name, too.
Yeah, they're supposed to take it out today also, right? On the second. Okay, I'll give them a call.
Into the game for $1,000, have a ton in front of me right now, and we're one hand in. Very shortly after that, I look down at ace king of spades, and with one limp, I raise to $25. The small blind 3-bets to 80, and then it folds back to me. A very interesting meta in this hand is the player who got stacked in the previous hand had been very openly saying how I would never 4-bet ace-king, making his jam very poor. I personally disagree, think that I would 4-bet ace-king a decent percentage of the time, but all that knowledge kind of lingering out there is definitely going to add a dynamic to this hand. So when I make it 275 with aces, I'm going to make it 275 with ace-king. And my opponent in this hand is literally saying out loud how I'm probably doing this super light just based on how much banter has been going on at this table at this point. So I know this, he knows it. We might have to get a $1,500 all-in pre here just to prove that I would get it in with ace-king. But it does not come to that. My opponent eventually just makes the call. So 275 apiece to the flop of king 10 5 2 clubs. One spade. My opponent checks to me. I do think he's 3-betting and calling a 4-bet a lot lighter than usual. But on this board specifically, I'm either way ahead or way behind. Not too worried about flush draws in a 4-bet pot, as those would be like ace-jack, ace-queen of clubs, and they're pretty much never going to fold if I bet anyway, so I think taking a street of pot control here is fine. When I check it back, the turn is the 10 of hearts. It's actually a very good card for me. I think my opponent is more likely to have queens, jacks, 10s, 9s, 8s, and with only one combination of pocket 10s, all the other pocket pairs are much more likely. When my opponent bets $225 into me, I do think it's possible you could have queen jack, ace jack, ace queen, some club varieties, and maybe king queen some of the time. but I'm ahead of pretty much all the hands, so I think that this hand functions pretty good as a check call. If I raise, I'm only getting called by a random 10x, and all hands my opponent could be bluffing or semi-bluffing with would probably just fold, so happy to just check call this one. And the river is the 7 of clubs. So clubs completes. I'm now kind of happy with the line I chose. If my opponent bets here, at least I somewhat pot control and I can just call down happily. But when he checks to me, I don't think about it too long. I don't think my opponent's ever going to call with a worse hand. However, this opponent's very competent. He could have a hand like pocket jacks with a jack of clubs and check jam, which would kind of put me in a tough spot. So I don't really ever think I have the worst hand here, but pot's big enough. I don't see myself getting called by worse. So I just check it back, and I'll even show first when I'm pretty certain I have the best hand here. Played a little bit weak, a little bit passive, but, you know, was a 4-bet pot and pretty sizable for me. So played 2 hands and up even more. Feeling good about this day, but we're not done yet. We open ace jack of hearts in middle position to $15. 2 late position players call, and the button calls as well. Going 3 ways to 9-9-6, 2 spades. When I'm first to act, I'm just going to go for a C-bet. My opponents can miss this a lot of the time. I have all the overpairs in range. Some hands we're just going to C-bet no matter what. This is going to be one of them.
You don't want to do this.
But when I make it $40, I don't even get through one person. Player to my direct left almost min raises it to 90. And yeah, this 0 equity bluff C-bet's just not going to work for me on this one. I let it go, he wins. After that, with ace queen of clubs in the +1 position with 1 limp, I raise it to $25. The cutoff and the limper calls. We're going 3 ways to a flop of queen 8-7 rainbow. 1 club. Flopping top pair, top kicker. We're not going to get into any fancy play syndrome. We're just going to bet about half pot. I continuation bet for $40. Only the cutoff calls, so we're heads up to a turn card, which is the 4 of spades. It does complete 5-6, but I don't really expect this particular opponent to ever have that hand here. So I'm just going to continue betting. Get value from king, queen, queen, jack, maybe a stickier pocket jacks, pocket tens. Either way, we're just going to continue betting. I bet $110, and this is too much. We win this one. Pretty standard, but still trending in the right direction. We win another small one before this hand happened. I was not involved, but the cutoff raises to 30. Small blind raises to 90. Cutoff 4 bets to 200. Small blind 5 bets to 590. And it's back to the cutoff. Definitely people playing a little wider than usual, I would say, in general today at Sarasota. Even more so when the cutoff 6-bet all-in rips and gets called. There's not too many 6-bets in poker that is not aces. But when the runout comes out 10-9, 5-5-9, both players have ace-king. So although it's a chop, it is kind of unique to see 6-bet pots where the 2 winning hands are both ace-high. Come to Sarasota. After that, I look down at ace-queen of diamonds. I raise to $20 from the +1 position. I get 3-bet by the button to 80. I think out of position, ace-queen doesn't really function too well as a 4-bet. You're pretty much always getting called by better, and you're in a dominated spot. So out of position, I'm just going to make the call here, and we're going to go heads up to a flop of ace 5-5. We have top pair good kicker. Feel like I have a hammer lock on this hand right now. When I check, my opponent continues for $65. This is pretty standard. I'd say he could have ace-king here some of the time, but he could equally have ace-jack, ace-10 some of the time. And there are more combinations of those hands than the ace-king. So we're going to happily continue in this one. When the turn is the deuce of clubs, just kind of preparing to call this guy down. You know, I have top pair good kicker. Board's pretty safe, nothing to really be worried about. But when I check on the street, he checks it back. And the river is the deuce of diamonds. I don't want this to check through if my opponent had like kings or 8s plus. It'd be pretty bad to miss out on the value on the river. So we're going to go for a small river bet. Try to get a crying call from maybe 10s, things like that. But when I make it $125, my opponent raises to $325. I don't think there's much of a decision here. I do think my opponent is good enough to raise this spot with ace-10, ace-jack. So we're pretty happily going to make the call on this one. And he quickly shows ace-queen himself. We're chopping it up, but definitely a spot that I think both players played relatively well. I went another small one before the next hand of note. With 2 limps, the cutoff raised to $30. The small blind calls. I'm in the big blind with ace-jack of spades. I think this one's definitely strong enough for a 3-bet, can win a bunch of money, or play a bigger size pot where I have a pretty strong hand. So I'll make it 155. Be plenty fine to just take this down now, but the cutoff is no quitter. He's going to call the 155, and the small blind decides to get out of the way. So we're going heads up to a flop of 6-5-6 2 diamonds. Not my favorite for obvious reasons, but I have all the over pairs in range. I could have ace-x of diamonds. So I'm also going to c-bet with my 0 equity bluffs, similar to the last time I had ace-jack. Some hands are just going to be a c-bet no matter what, and this is going to be one of them. So I continue for $125. I didn't really expect my opponent to call this all too often. When he does, I think he's weighted towards middling pocket pairs, 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks. So pretty much only going to continue on a ace, king, queen, jack, maybe a 10 some of the time. But when the river is the 3 of clubs, quite a disastrous card for me. If my opponent had as weak as like 7-8, he's still feeling pretty good about it. Still has overs and nothing would really scare off a pair of 8s at this point. So I check, honestly prepared to just give up on this one. My 0 equity bluffs are not going very good today, but my opponent checks it back. And the river is the queen of diamonds. This is go time.
And here we go.
If I'm trying to get my opponent off a middling pocket pair, I think I have to go relatively big with this. Definitely north of half pot, closer to 2/3. I would definitely choose a bigger sizing if I had ace king of diamonds, ace jack of diamonds. Theoretically, as played, I do have pocket queens here some of the time as well. And I might bet ace queen on this particular river some of the time. So I decide on a sizing of $375. Think this merges all my value hands, and my infrequent 0% equity bluffs are going to be in there as well. And this puts my opponent into the blender. He keeps saying he was going to call on any blank river. He was totally going to call. He's thinking about calling. I'm quite disappointed at this point. But then he folds, and we get it through. Quite a sick bluff. Definitely happy this one worked out. It's easier when you're running good in the day to pull the trigger on these. So happy that all this has been working out for me so far. Win another small one before a final hand of note. With 2 limpers, I raised to $30 with queen jack of diamonds. Both blinds and both limpers call, so we end up going 5 ways to a flop of ace 5-3 rainbow 1 diamond. When it checks all the way to me, I'm not really going to bluff into 4 other players, so this is probably just going to be a check give up from me. Until the turn is the king of diamonds. We turn 13 outs. Feels like the nuttest card I could ever hope for. And this time it checks all the way to the player to my direct right, who bets $50. When everyone else checks through on the flop and this opponent bets turn, I don't think anyone else can have too strong of hand. And my direct right opponent is a limp caller versus I'm an open raiser. I could easily have pocket aces, pocket kings, ace king, and play the same way. Yes, I would check back top set on such a dry board and probably just check kings on this board as well. So I actually have a lot of nutted hands here. So with my exact hand, I'm going to raise, represent one of those hands. I make it $175, and all 3 other players fold until it gets to the final opponent, who shows the ace of spades and folds. So we get another pretty sick semi-bluff through into 4 players, and that's going to be about it for me today. Into the game for $1,000, out of the game for $24.70, which is a profit of $14.70 across 5 hours, equates to $294 an hour, or 58 big blinds an hour. Yeah, this session was pretty good. Definitely had a lot of 4 bets, even a 6 bet. Additionally found some pretty good bluff spots, which all worked out for me. Got a big win, another big win coming up. The upswing is continuing. If you've seen it all the way to this point, I appreciate it. Thank you. Consider liking and subscribing. Helps me out a ton. I will see you on the next one.